Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Joining us today is a historian, collector, a lifelong Marilyn Monroe fan. He assisted auction companies authenticating and verifying memorabilia of Marilyn Monroe. He's the owner of one of the world's largest private collections of Marilyn Monroe's personal property. It includes clothing, furs, cosmetics, financial documents, and much more. For those of you that might be curious, the collection is not for sale. Please welcome to the show, Scott Fortner. Scott, welcome to Before the Lights.
Thank you very much. That's a phrase I often find myself saying to other people. I am a collector, not a dealer. Nothing is for sale, but thank you for asking.
Yeah, I agree with you. How does a small town Nebraska kid end up in California collecting Marilyn Monroe memorabilia?
Well, my journey to California started after I graduated high school. I went into the military, ended up landing in California for part of my tour of duty and ended up staying in California. But my journey with Marilyn started when I was much younger, probably about the 7th or 8th grade. And interestingly, it actually wasn't Marilyn that was my first introduction to old Hollywood. It was Jane Mansfield. And I, on HBO, saw Lonnie Anderson portray Jane Mansfield in the Jane Mansfield story. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then from Jane Mansfield, very quickly kind of discovered Marilyn. And then after that, it was all Marilyn all the time. So that's pretty much how I got started. It's really been a decades-long fascination with Marilyn. And like many people, just started collecting certain things. I'd always been very interested in books. And so I would collect many books about Marilyn. And then when her estate came up for auction, I noticed that some of those same pieces that had sold at the 1999 first estate sale for Marilyn were actually coming up on eBay. And this was about 20 years ago. And back when the collectibles on eBay actually were the real thing, the real authentic pieces. And today there's a lot of people taking advantage of how to sell items that aren't necessarily authentic. But that's how I got started. And I thought, wow, why am I collecting books when I could own things that she actually owned? And that was 20 years ago. And here we are today with probably the world's largest privately held collection. So I'm not a company or an entity or a business or a museum or whatnot. I personally own all of these items. And so probably the largest in the world today.
What else do you do besides collect memorabilia of Marilyn Monroe?
Well, I don't really collect anyone else. I like to travel quite a bit. I'm into fitness. I have a full-time job and I work. This is a pretty important part of what I do, but it's not all that I do. So yeah, but yeah, very important part.
Scott, what is the fascination with Marilyn that so many people cannot get enough of? Is it the attraction to her looks and her vulnerability, or is it much more than that?
Well, I think it depends on the fan. First of all, one of the things, I was doing a panel interview when I was exhibiting my collection in Australia in 2016, and somebody said, well, why did you choose Marilyn? Why Marilyn? And then it just kind of occurred to me that you don't really choose Marilyn. I think Marilyn chooses you. So you just, in general, I think people have a fascination with her. There's quite a bit of mystery into how her passing occurred, her death. Lots of conspiracy theories. I always find that people really relate to Marilyn in very different ways. Some people just are interested in her look and her modeling days. Other people are very interested in who she was, the actual woman behind the character that she created, because Marilyn actually was a character, not a real person. It was someone that she created. And I also find that people are very protective of Marilyn. So these days, particularly online, it doesn't bode well oftentimes actually, to get into any type of a debate with people online, because, their positions are very stuck, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I find it a little bit difficult and challenging to have just a real kind of serious, back and forth with people. And I just say, okay, well, that's your opinion. Great. No problem. So lots of people have different opinions, but definitely relate to Marilyn in very unique and special ways that are special to them.
I don't want to assume that every single one of my listeners knows the complete background of Marilyn Monroe. So if you would, let's just kind of put this out there. She was born Norma Baker, and then 1946 changed her name to Marilyn Monroe. Why did she choose to change her name?
Well, the studio really, her name was Norma Jean Doherty at the time, and that really wasn't the name of a movie star. And so they wanted to change her name to something that was a bit more interesting. And so Marilyn was selected, was the name of another star, and then Monroe was a family name. And so they came up with the name Marilyn Monroe when she was working at the studio.
Who was Marilyn outside of being Marilyn Monroe?
You know, I think a lot of people just really equate Marilyn with this really sexy, breathy, blonde character that she created. But she actually was very serious about her craft, very serious about acting. She was a very sensitive individual. And I've met many people through the years who knew Marilyn personally. And there were many different sides of Marilyn. You know, one aspect of Marilyn was that she was very kind and very thoughtful and very generous. And another aspect of Marilyn is she was actually quite a smart businesswoman. And interestingly, she would often refer to Marilyn in the third person. She would say, well, you've got Marilyn Monroe. You really need to work with what you have. Use Marilyn to your advantage. She knew that what she was doing was creating and projecting an image, a star, if you will. And she really turned into that individual. So that wasn't who she was all the time. But she was very smart, very bright. She was very conscious of how her image was portrayed and received, and very thoughtful about those types of things. And she also really wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, you know, really wanted to perfect her craft. Unfortunately, she kept being pulled back into this character that she created. And she, I think, ultimately realized that that was her strength. And so would often revert back to the Marilyn that people really wanted to see. But I also think she was trying very hard to be taken seriously as an actress. And some of her roles, actually, she was in more of a dramatic role rather than your comedy, where she was the breathy, sexy, kind of not so bright blonde. So she did have several roles where she was able to break through, but ultimately, you know, kept being pulled back into those characters.
What are the number of items in your collection?
Oh gosh, I've lost count. I mean, it's in the hundreds.
Wow,
for sure. The majority of my collection is paper documents and things that I find really fascinating because they show the person behind the movie star. So things with her handwriting on them, notes, handwritten checks, bank statements that clarify how much she had in her banks and what she spent in her bank accounts and what she spent her money on. I find all of those types of things really fascinating. But I also own clothing from her personal wardrobe. Toward the end of her life, she very much got into Pucci by the designer Emilio Pucci from Italy. And so I have one of her Pucci blouses that's actually quite synonymous with Marilyn. And furs, pieces that she used in films, cosmetics, books from her library, things like that. So yeah, it's a pretty broad collection, and I really focus on the personal items. You know, I know people that really enjoy the film costumes and the film pieces, and I think those are all nice. But I gravitate toward those pieces that she actually owned, she used in her day-to-day life.
And I'm going to get into some of those because I'm fascinated by those as well. But what is your most treasured item, or do you have one?
Well, you know, I think it's kind of hard to really, I think that I've got different layers of items. Some are really significant and important in that they were significant and important to Marilyn or some aspect of her life. For example, I own a white fox muff that she wore to the premiere of How to Marry a Millionaire in 1953. And that muff, together with the stole, it was a matching set. Those were the very first furs that she ever bought with her own money. Right. So that was like, you know, I'm a star, I'm a celebrity, movie stars wear furs. I need to buy furs. Here's my first set of furs, which was a white fox muff and the stole. So that, I think, is kind of a significant piece. I also own a Brownie camera that was given to her when she was younger, that was gifted to her by her Aunt Anna. And I always find it a bit ironic that, you know, one of the most photographed women in the world, I own her personal camera that she's had since childhood. So, you know, those types of things, I think. Items that were really significant based on public appearances. I own the evening cape that she wore to the East of Eden premiere in 1955 in New York. There are countless photos of Marilyn at that event, and she was an usherette. It was a fundraiser for the Actors Studio. And so imagine being taken to your seat at a movie theater by Marilyn and handed a program and, saying, enjoy the show. And, pretty fascinating. But yeah, I own, an item that she actually wore to that event. So I think one of the most intriguing things that I own is some of her Erna Laszlo makeup. And she knew Dr. Laszlo personally, and he actually created some products for her specifically. For example, when she had surgery, and he created a cream for her so that the scar wouldn't be as significant as it might have been without some type of treatment. But in one of the products, two of the products, but one more significantly the other, you can actually see her finger trails in the remaining product in the cream. So it's really kind of fascinating to know that, this was, I call it my Marilyn was here moment, because it was her product. She used it, and you can still see her trails from her fingers in the product.
Is there a possibility of putting a value on what your collection is worth?
I think it's really dependent upon the market. And I think, what I've been seeing in recent trends with, first of all, many people are just holding on to what they have. There aren't people that are selling their pieces the way that they have in the past. And so I think people are holding on to the items more as an investment these days. But I mean, there was a bowl, a simple bowl that Marilyn owned, that sold for over $11,000 at an auction just last month, earlier this month. $11,000 for a bowl.
For a bowl.
So, if you use that as a benchmark, then I would say it's definitely worth seven figures.
Marilyn fact out there to our listeners. She actually caught a chill standing bare-legged for over 3 hours in the updraft from the skirt scene in a 7-year itch that is very popular and a lot of people know of. Scott, from all the people you've talked to and the history that you've done on Marilyn, what was the quality of actress that she was thought of?
I don't think that people took her seriously at the time. I think that some of her roles, she was recognized by people outside of the US. For example, she received the Italian equivalent of the Oscar for her role in The Prince and the Showgirls. She was also recognized by France for her acting. But in the US, she never even got an Oscar nomination. And she probably should have for some of her films, particularly Bus Stop, which was quite exceptional. So I think most people thought that she really wasn't an actress to be taken seriously and was more of a comedian than a serious actress. She was recognized for her comedic roles, particularly Some Like It Hot. She won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a comedy or musical for Some Like It Hot. But I think in general, she never really got the recognition for her serious acting skills that she so much desired.
Go to MarilynMonroeCollection.com. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I had a great time on that website, diving in and doing some research. I want to take a look into her private life and look at some personal documents. Her finances at the time of her death, $1,300 in her bank account, but overdrafts of over $4,200 in the same account, and then the balance in the Irving Trust of over $1,400 on August 1st, 1962. But on August 3 was $111.71. Were you able to account where that money was spent between that time?
There is some financial accounting that takes place after Marilyn has passed away. I have access to that, but I haven't necessarily gone through and connected all of those dots yet. I think one thing to remember is Marilyn had many accounts when she was at that point in her life. She had accounts for the East Coast banks. She had accounts for West Coast banks. She had business accounts for Marilyn Monroe Productions. And people talk about how, the greatest film star, the greatest sex symbol, when she passed away, she was overdrawn. Well, she was overdrawn, but that was just one account out of many where she had money. I have bank statements where she had several $100,000 in the bank at periods of her life in the late 1950s. So she actually was quite wealthy, and she definitely did not die penniless. But it took a lot to be Marilyn. And so one thing that I have discovered is, she paid a lot for cosmetics. She paid a lot for facials. She paid a lot for hair treatment. She paid a lot for her clothing. She had a staff of people. She had a secretary on each coast that was helping her, a business manager at one point with Inez Melson. And so, I think there was quite a bit of accounting that was going on constantly. And particularly after she passed away, it took quite some time for her estate to be settled. Lee Strasberg, who she left the bulk of her personal belongings to, he wasn't even given those pieces until probably 2 decades after she passed away. So all of that sat in storage for 2 decades before he took possession of all of her items.
Some of the things, listeners, that Marilyn Monroe was into, her favorite female singer, Ella Fitzgerald, male singer, Frank Sinatra. And she was a big fan of 1953 Dom Perignon. Was it just that year, or was it just champagne in general?
I think that she just liked champagne in general. You know, many, many photos of Marilyn drinking champagne, and also many receipts in her personal files where Marilyn purchased champagne. And so I think it was just something that she really enjoyed drinking.
I think another thing listeners may not be aware of is that she was a vast reader and owned hundreds of books. And you have mentioned that you have in your collection some of her books. Do you have any idea how many books were in her collection?
Over 400.
Wow.
There were over 400, I believe 400 and maybe close to 430 books. And she did read those books. Couple of the books that I have, she has actually written notes in, and she's underlined certain passages. One book I have, there's a bookmark in it from the bookstore, Pickwick bookstore. It's exactly where she left it, right? So there are no markings after that point in the book. And 2 of the books that are in my collection, you can actually see in photos of Marilyn in her home. So those books are actually with her. So it's kind of cool. That's my thing, really, is being able to source those items that I could buy that are actually pictured with Marilyn. I find that really fascinating.
She was named Sexiest Woman of the Century by Playboy in 1999. There's been a lot of speculation and some I don't know if they're misconceptions or just people don't have the real facts, but was her true size really 36, 24, 36, or was it something different than that?
So Marilyn's weight did fluctuate rather extensively over the years.
Okay.
And when she started out, she was very voluptuous. In the late 1950s, she put on a little bit more weight. You can see in Some Like It Hot and in Let's Make Love, she's just a little bit heavier. And of course, when she was filming Some Like It Hot, she was actually pregnant. But yes, those are pretty much her actual measurements. There are documents that verify what her measurements were. There is documentation from Blue Book Modeling Agency that talks about what her measurements were. And then her measurements were clarified actually on her death certificate as well. So those actually were her measurements. And, you know, many people lift up Marilyn as a champion, if you will, for plus size. And she actually never was a plus-sized body. She was fleshy. And so, you know, there was a line in Some Like It Hot where Jack Lemmon said it's like Jell-O on springs. And that really was true. I mean, when Marilyn walked, she wiggled. And so she moved in a very certain specific way. And I think that made people believe or feel that there was actually maybe a little bit more than there actually was. But technically, she was very small. I've got her clothing items. I have a belt that measures 27 or 28 inches when it's fastened, and I've got a picture of her wearing it. So she was a very small person at about 5'5.5", and her average weight was about 115, 117 pounds. So she, you know, Roseanne Barr one time said Marilyn Monroe was a size 12. You know, that's all I've got to say. But, you know, I mean, there's a thing called vanity sizing. With size 12 today is not what it was back in 1955 or 1960 when Marilyn was alive. So it's really kind of interesting how people hold her up as this icon for a certain size of individual, when in actuality, she was never that size.
In your opinion, who did Marilyn truly love the most? Was it DiMaggio? Was it Kennedy? Was it Sinatra? Was it Arthur Miller? Was it Doherty? Who did she really have an affinity love attraction to?
So this question, boy, you're gonna put me in a corner, and you're gonna cause quite an outrage if there are any Marilyn fans.
That's what I'm saying. It's in your opinion.
Yeah, that have a strong opinion about this. Those that have a strong opinion about it. I believe that her true love was Arthur Miller.
Okay.
And she met Arthur Miller in the early 1950s. And I believe that was the point when she became very interested in him. So if you look at the people that Marilyn was really attracted to, or the men that were important to her in her life, they all kind of had the same kind of type of a look. She loved Abraham Lincoln. She loved Joe DiMaggio. She loved Arthur Miller. They all have very similar types of looks. So she had a very specific look that she went for in men. But I believe that Arthur Miller was the one that was her true love. They were together for around 5 years. It was ultimately a marriage that ended in divorce. And I think that people think about Arthur and how horrible he was to her and how, what an awful person he was. But there was also a side of Arthur that very much loved Marilyn. I mean, the love letters that he wrote to Marilyn are incredible. And I believe that she truly loved him. And I think, people put Marilyn on this pedestal like she was, this angel. And, the people I know that knew Marilyn talked about the fact that she probably was a very, very difficult person to live with. And so you've got Arthur Miller trying to, who's Arthur Miller trying to be the husband of Marilyn Monroe, the greatest sex symbol of all time, her feeling like she's got an image to live up to. So I believe that it was Arthur Miller, but, to me, it makes sense that their marriage didn't work out because, I'm not really sure that, I'll just say it. I'm not really sure that anybody would have been able to make Marilyn truly happy the way she needed a lot from other people, right? She was very insecure. She needed people to prop her up. She needed people to boost her self-confidence. And I think, Arthur Miller just couldn't handle that, unfortunately. But it was Arthur, in my opinion.
Good enough. In your collection, you own a prescription pill bottle that was Marilyn Monroe's. She also had a history of bronchitis. From what you know, how many prescription pills was Marilyn taking?
Well, I think the problem with the prescriptions that Marilyn was on is that she was seeing multiple physicians and they weren't aligning the care and the prescriptions. And so people that I know that were with Marilyn, she was popping pills pretty regularly. Back then, it wasn't really known to be a drug problem. It's just what you did. I mean, the studio gave stars pills to keep them awake, put them asleep, those types of things. So several prescriptions, research shows that she was receiving multiple prescriptions from different physicians and they were not coordinating the care that they were delivering to Marilyn. And so, of course, that was obviously a problem. The
prescription pill bottle that you owned, was it empty or was there anything left in it?
It was empty. Yeah, I believe it's illegal these days to actually sell medication like that. So it was empty.
She was performing for the U.S. troops. She mentioned that was one of her happiest times of her life. She received special recognition for her unselfish service to the armed forces in Korea. What did Scott Korea do for Marilyn Psychic?
I think that Marilyn really got a chance to perform live and receive feedback from an audience in a way that she'd never experienced before. I think that was just one of those first opportunities for Marilyn where she was up on stage performing and people just went crazy and responded to her. There was actually a time where she came back after one of her performances and she said to Joe DiMaggio something like, "Oh, over 10,000 men were screaming and yelling for me. It was an amazing experience. You wouldn't believe it. And he said, "Oh, yes, I would." Because of course he was a star in his own right and very much wanted Marilyn to be a housewife and a stay-at-home wife for him and maybe mother someday. So there was quite a bit of conflict between the two of them. But I think in interviews, Marilyn has actually said her happiest time throughout her entire career was performing for the troops in Korea. And you can just see it. I get emails from people who say, I've got a photo from Marilyn in Korea. I just got an email from someone the other day and she's like, "I need to pay off my college. I want to sell this." And I said, "Well, I don't know how much you owe on your college, but these photographs are so common. They're really not worth more than a couple of $100 unless they are exceptional photos. They would have to be Marilyn in color. They'd have to be completely, perfectly in focus and just a really unique, special image of Marilyn. But you can go online and just do a search for Marilyn Monroe Korea and look at countless thousands of photos of her. And that, to me, just kind of represents all of the troops that took these incredible photos and how happy they were that she was there performing for them. But for her, I think it was incredible.
She died almost 60 years ago, which is hard to imagine. What is the traffic like at Marilyn's burial site still these days?
It's the most popular spot at the cemetery, Pierce Brothers Memorial Park in Westwood, and you can see how often Marilyn's crypt is touched because the marble is discolored compared to everyone else around her. People are touching her crypt constantly. People put on lipstick and they kiss the crypt, those types of things. But almost every time I go and visit Marilyn at her final resting place, there are other people there. There are always flowers there. It's undoubtedly the most popular celebrity in the cemetery. And there are many other famous people there as well. Truman Capote is buried there. Jack Lemmon is buried there. Rodney Dangerfield, Farrah Fawcett. I mean, the list just goes on and on. But some of Marilyn's family is actually buried there as well. And her half sister Bernice and Joe selected this location because she had family that was there with her in the cemetery.
You were able to visit her Brentwood home a couple times. What was it like walking in the footsteps of Marilyn's home and actually being in the bedroom where she was found?
So Marilyn's Brentwood home is what a lot of fans would refer to as like, Mecca, like a place that you can't get. It's so exclusive and so hard to get inside. There's so many other Marilyn locations that you can get to. You can go visit her in her crypt. You can go to the Avalon Hotel in Beverly Hills, and if you're lucky enough, you can actually rent the room that she lived in when she stayed at that hotel. And you can go to other locations where it's known that she was. But to get inside her house in Brentwood is just one of those things that very, very few people have had the opportunity to do. And there are limited photos of her house available, where you can actually look and see what it was like when Marilyn lived there. You can see the furniture that she did have. She didn't live there very long. And being inside is just one of those amazing things that you don't even realize that it's happening to you until kind of after the fact. You realize it's just like, wow, it's just incredible. And it's much smaller than it looks in photos. You walk in and you are not impressed at all by its size because it is a relatively small house. But yeah, it's really kind of amazing to be there because you know that that's the place where she lived and it's the place where she died. It was the only home that she ever purchased with her own money. I took it upon myself to put my phone in my shirt pocket with the camera going, and I recorded my tour there, which was highly unacceptable. They said very clearly, no photos, no photography of any kind. But I thought, this is the only chance I'm ever going to have to capture this. And so I actually did capture it, and it's on my YouTube channel now. It's not the best footage. It's terrible, terrible footage because it literally was in my pocket. And, I did what I could in the situation, but it gives people a chance to go inside Marilyn's home and see what it's like. But standing in the bedroom was pretty amazing just to think. It's like I've seen these photos 1,000 times. I recognize this room. And here I am. It was amazing.
What I thought was really cool about your video was the birds chirping in the background just made it like extra special as you were filming this. I'm like, wow, this is crazy that it's like these birds are singing and as everybody's going through and I'm going to put a link to your Instagram, Marilyn Monroe collection in the show notes as well. But that was really cool.
I picked up on that immediately. And I thought, well, if this is the way it was in 1962 when Marilyn bought this house, then no wonder she loved it here. It's very serene. It's very calm. It's very quiet. And there were birds just singing the entire time I was outside. Basically, you can hear birds singing, and it really was quite fantastic.
What's the newest piece to your collection?
Oh gosh, the newest piece. That's an interesting question. What have I gotten lately? I think probably the newest piece is something. Well, last year I got two really kind of amazing different items. And so I think most people collect, they realize that there are things out there that they see that they just instantly become connected to for some reason. And you just think, wow, that's really fantastic. I would love to add that to my collection someday. And so I've got several pieces in the 1999 catalog from the Marilyn Monroe estate sale at Christie's. And that was the year that her first big auction occurred. And you look through that catalog and you think, I'd love to have that. I'd love to have that. Well, one of those items was this really beautiful Tiffany style lamp, brass lamp with beautiful amber colored glass. And I always thought, man, that lamp is just fantastic. I would just love to own that lamp. And then many years later, I saw photos of Marilyn taken inside of the Marilyn Monroe Productions office on Lexington Avenue in New York in 1955, and the lamp was behind her. You could see it in the photos. Last year, the lamp came up for auction again. So whoever bought it at the 99 auction put it up for auction again. And I thought, well, here we go. I have to have it. And so I was lucky enough to land the lamp at auction. And so I'm actually sitting next to it right now. I turn it on every single day. It's the lamp that lights my desk. But it's this gorgeous 26-pound solid brass lamp. The shade is about 22 inches across. It's just enormous. But that's one thing that I added last year and something I'd always wanted to add. And it's one of the few pieces I actually use. Almost everything is packed away securely and safely, but the lamp, I had it rewired and actually use it. The other thing that I added last year was 2 of Marilyn's 1962 phone books. And they are fascinating because, today we pick up our cell phone, our mobile phone, and it has all of our contacts in there. Back in Marilyn's day, it was a hard copy phone book. And these phone books came up for auction, and 2 of them were sold together in the same lot. They were listed, but nobody bought them. And I didn't bid on them because I was waiting just to kind of see what would happen. And ultimately, nobody bought them at the auction. And so I got in touch with the auction house after the fact and made an offer, and the seller sold them to me. And so there are 2 of Marilyn's phone books from 1962. So the year that she passed away, they were her 2 final phone books. They've got her handwriting in them, and you can look through and see who was important to Marilyn in her life at that time. And it's really kind of interesting because there are landscapers, there are maids, there are people that are just normal kind of day-to-day service providers that are in Marilyn's phone book that I guess she would be calling about certain things. But there's also many other celebrities in there. Ann Landers, I found really interesting to find in Marilyn's phone book in 1962. So, and I got both of them.
That's awesome.
And recently somebody offered me $115,000 for one.
Did you sell it?
No. I said, maybe. I said, right now these items still very much bring me joy. And they have for quite some time. And that's really my mantra and my benchmark, right? It's like you ask yourself, and I think a lot of people do this, when they're making decisions about certain things, does it bring you joy in your life? And if the answer is yes, then, continue. If the answer is no, then make a choice about it, right? And so everything very much still brings me joy. But, he basically said, well, the offer stands, let me know. So maybe someday. But yeah, so I still have both of them.
On behalf of my listeners, because the first thing that came to my mind is probably something that came to theirs, was Frank Sinatra's number in those books.
Yes. All the Rat Pack is in there.
Scott, if somebody's out there would like to get like an autograph picture or an autograph of Marilyn Monroe, how rare is it? And being that you authenticate this stuff, how do they know if they're getting the real Marilyn Monroe signature?
Well, you have to be very, very careful when it comes to anything collectible related to Marilyn at that particular level. So I'm not talking things like that were mass produced that you can purchase as normal collectibles, but Marilyn is one of the most sought after celebrities for collecting today. Her items continue to hold value and continue to go up in value. Marilyn holds the record for the most expensive personal dress ever sold at auction, and the most expensive film costume ever sold at auction. So the JFK dress sold originally for a little over 1.2 million, and then 2016 it sold again for $4.7 million. That's the most expensive dress ever sold at auction. And the 7 Year Itch dress, of course, is the subway dress is the most expensive film costume ever sold at auction. But as I mentioned earlier, eBay today is a location that is really risky if you're going to purchase something at this particular level. I mean, I scroll through eBay pretty regularly, and and there are just so many fake items that are for sale, and people just create fake certificates of authenticity or those types of things, and they sell those items. And autograph photos are another thing that are regularly forged and faked. So you really have to be careful. I mean, someone just sent me something the other day and said, well, and it was an autographed photo, and it was a photo of Marilyn, but it was a secretarial signature, right? So, you get to the point where you know what's good and what's not good, and what's secretarial and what's forged. Several years ago, somebody sent me a calendar of Marilyn on the Red Velvet series, and somebody had signed her name to it, but they spelled her name wrong. And I just emailed back and I said, well, this is not Marilyn Monroe's signature. I'm pretty sure of it. And they emailed back and said, well, no, it's real. It's authentic. And I said, well, I think Marilyn knew how to spell her own name. So if you look at it, it's the I and the Y are reversed. They did Mrylin, not Mrilyn. So no, it's not authentic. So you just really have to be watchful and pay attention to certain things. Look at timing, look at where Marilyn was in her life compared to what the signature looked like, because it changed a little bit over time, but it was synonymous pretty much throughout her life, but you could tell there were times when it was a little bit different. So
when you were just explaining that, something popped in my mind. What is the Marilyn Monroe brand then versus Marilyn Monroe, the real person?
From the perspective of Marilyn herself?
Yes.
Well, so Marilyn, as I mentioned, was a character that was created by Norma Jean. She was very much two people. And she knew that this character that she created, people expected to see this sex symbol, this sexy, breathy blonde that behaved and acted a certain way. But it was something that she transformed herself into becoming Marilyn. And multiple people that were with Marilyn have talked about times when, like, for example, Susan Strasberg, who was Paula and Lee Strasberg's daughter. So Lee Strasberg, of course, is considered the father of method acting, and he was nominated for an Oscar for The Godfather 2. So obviously, validated for his efforts. But their daughter was Susan Strasberg, and she was an actress. She talks about how walking down the street one day with Marilyn in New York, she had a scarf on and a long coat, and they were just walking along, and nobody recognized Marilyn. Nobody knew that it was her. And Marilyn just turned to Susan and said, "Do you want to see me be her?" And Marilyn literally transformed into Marilyn Monroe. So she tilted her head back, she slanted her eyes, she did something with her mouth, she started walking a certain way, she took her scarf off, and she was instantly mobbed on the street. Everybody recognized her as Marilyn. And all she did was just transition and change, transform the way that she held herself and walked. And she turned into Marilyn literally right in front of Susan's eyes. And other people have talked about that happening as well, where it was really something that she turned on and turned into. But the brand really was, sexy film star, a sex symbol. Yeah. And in her last interview, she said, well, if I am a sex symbol, I'd rather have it be a symbol of sex than of something else. So she very much knew what she was doing.
Is there a prize piece that you would love to have in your collection?
Oh, well, Marilyn is very well known for many, many public appearances and film roles. For example, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, when she sang Diamonds Are Girl's Best Friend, that's copied and imitated countless times. But, I think the most famous public appearance of Marilyn's ever, of course, was May 19th, 1962, when she sang Happy Birthday to President Kennedy, and the dress. The dress is the dress. Mm-hmm. And so if ever there were anything that I had an opportunity to get my hands on where budget was really no issue, it would be that dress that was designed by Jean-Louis, that she wore to sing Happy Birthday to President Kennedy. And that's just iconic. It's the Marilyn collectible. There is no other. Some people would say it's her house. I don't think I could live in her house because it's constantly visited by fans. People jump the fence, people hold their cameras up to get photos, those types of things. I personally know someone who jumped the fence and took a swim in a pool. So, those types of things you just really have to, be prepared for if you're going to live in Marilyn's house. But if I can't have Marilyn's dress, I have what she wore when she rehearsed Happy Birthday, Mr. President. A lot of people think the stories about this performance are just really crazy. People talk about, Marilyn got lost backstage and she was out of breath and that's why she sang it that way, or she was high or she was drunk that night. That's why she performed the song that way. The truth is, Marilyn performed the song the way that she rehearsed it. Paula Strasberg told her, "You cannot do this. It's way too sexy. It's for the president." But she did it anyway. So she knew exactly what she was doing when she performed Happy Birthday, Mr. President, the way that she did. She rehearsed it. She was there the day before rehearsing it on stage. And I've done photo comparisons of photos that were taken of her while she was rehearsing it and photos of her taken while she was doing the actual performance. Her movements and her gestures are exactly the same. Anyway, the green Poochie that she's wearing as she's rehearsing for the JFK gala is part of my collection. So if I can't have the gown, I have the blouse that she wore when she was rehearsing for it.
You had mentioned that gown had gone for $4 million. Do you know what it cost originally when it was made back in 1962?
There's a lot of speculation that it was over $12,000. I don't know where that came from. It was listed in the Christie's catalog, but I actually know exactly what she spent. And I believe it was less than $2,000 for the actual dress itself. So it wasn't that expensive. She bought the gown. It was designed by Jean-Louis. So she paid for the gown and then she had to pay to have all the crystals sewn onto it. So it was over $800 just to have all the crystals sewn onto it.
Under 2,000 to 4 million and still probably rising in value.
Yeah. I mean, all totaled with premium, it was $4.6 million. And Ripley's, believe it or not, purchased it. So they've got the dress and they plan to tour it.
Is there something about Marilyn that the average fan may not know about her that you could enlighten them on?
Well, I think the thing is what we've talked about already is that Marilyn was a character. She did not talk in real life the way that she talks in movies, right? It was a character that she created and something that she transformed herself into. And so I think a lot of people just think that that's who she was really. But the truth is that was a character. She was kind of a normal person. And you can hear interviews audio interviews where she does talk as a normal person. And, you wouldn't necessarily know while you're listening to her that was the person that is actually Marilyn Monroe, because it's pretty different.
Have you ever thought about if you had the opportunity to actually meet Marilyn Monroe, what you would say to her or ask her?
No. I haven't. And the reason is, in my mind, it's almost hard to believe that she was a real person because she's just reached this level of iconic, just the status that she's at today, at least in my mind, is such that it's hard to believe that she actually was a real person and did walk the earth. Other people I know that are Marilyn fans think very differently about that and recognize, she was a real person. They've got all of this other type of kind of connection in that way. But for me, no, I've never thought about that. And that's why. And it's because she just has reached this level of icon that sometimes it's hard to think she actually was a real person.
Being that you're the largest collector of her private memorabilia, do you ever put any of that stuff on exhibits? And if so, where is that? How can people find out when there are?
Sure. I've exhibited around the world. My collection's been on exhibit here in the US many, many times. It's been in Austria. It's been in Italy. It's been in Australia. I really enjoy exhibiting because what it does is it gives people a chance to see that side of Marilyn that you don't get to see normally every day. It's not a movie. It's not a modeling photo. It's her personal property. It's not on exhibit right now, has not been for a while, of course, due to the pandemic. But, we're always I'm always looking at new opportunities for exhibitions. And when I do get a chance to exhibit, I post that on social media. And so that lets people know where they might be able to see the pieces.
Again, folks, get to the show notes so you can get to MarilynMonroeCollection.com and go follow Scott at Marilyn Monroe Collection on Instagram as well. Scott, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and speaking about Marilyn Monroe, your collection, enlightening my fans and being on my show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Also, go follow me on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. And do me a favor, take 30 seconds, rate and review the show. 5 stars, nice comments are always appreciated. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.